Okay, so this law saying that it's legal, that's all. This law saying that it's legal for England to trade and traffic, that means buy and sell, slaves in Africa, happened in 1750. We're going to talk about 50 some odd years, 56 years later, it's still happening. So what we're writing is, imagine that it's 1806. 56 years later. Think about how many slaves have been trafficked in 56 years. Probably millions. Hundreds of thousands and then close to a million, because we know that over the time of slave trade, 12-something million were trafficked. So at this time, probably close to a million or more had been trafficked by 1806. And you are a member of the British Parliament. So you are one of the British Parliament. You are one who is trying to pass a law and convince the rest of these people that are on the Parliament to pass a law that will outlaw or make illegal the slave trade. Remember, we're not saying to end slavery. That's a very much bigger concept. You're just saying, take this law that we made 56 years ago, get rid of it. Get that law that we made off the books. Let's stop this buying and selling. Whatever slavery we still have, I'm not going to talk about that, but let's stop this continued buying and selling that we're doing, that we made legal 56 years ago.
How did slavery end up?
How did it end up stopping? In 1860, I want to say 4. I could be wrong. They passed the Emancipation Proclamation in the U.S. I believe under Abraham Lincoln, and that outlawed slavery. It still took years for the South, even though it was illegal, the South of the U.S. to stop doing it. People would be like, yeah, well, we've always been doing it. We're not just going to change now. And even people who were in the lawmakers, the police at that time, the sheriffs, they were like, well, we're not going to arrest you because you're still doing slavery, because we still want to do it ourselves. So it took another 60 years or something for this to stop, even after this time. So 100 years after they made this law, millions of slaves had been trafficked. So we're going to ask the rest of Parliament, you're this person and you're asking the rest of the people that you work with, you're on Parliament, to pass a law that will outlaw the slave trade, make it illegal. You have to convince them to vote to abolish the buying and selling of slaves, the buying and selling, not all of slavery. Okay, that's too big. You're just going to say, stop the law we made in the past. So let's look at the information that you have. You guys have on this document that you have been studying, the one called Primary and Secondary Sources. You have a bunch of reasons why slave trade is bad, don't you? Yeah, don't you have? Who are the people in this picture? What is the point? What did you learn from this picture right here, slave couple? What are some of the negative things that happened during the buying and selling of trade? And buying and selling of slaves.
They convent their same race,
There's their own people.
abandon them.
Yeah, so you're saying one of the points you give could be that people were going against their own people for this slave trade. You're turning cultures against cultures. What's something else that you learned here that could be a reason that you should say, let's stop this slave trade? What else is on here? What else do you see? Another reason that would be proof about why this should be stopped. Lisa?
They're about to beat one of the slaves.
Yeah, there's beatings. People who are considered slaves are beaten. It's inhumane. It's not something we do to people. something you do to animals, and even at that, people sometimes are like, oh, right? Okay, thinking about this information on here. You might have some facts in here that you could look at. We're not going to talk too much. But does anybody remember the part here where it says, which have been passed good are marked on the chest with a red hot iron, imprinting the mark of the French, English, or Dutch companies. Do you guys remember reading that?
Yeah.
Have you seen them do this to cattle? They it's called branding. They take a hot metal thing and you put the mark, it's almost like a tattoo, but it's like a scar. So when it scars up, instead of having a line like I have on my knee, you have the shape of whatever that seal was. So think of some of the things that you read, some of the reasons. What about in this picture? What are some of the things that you could talk about where you could say, whoa, we should really stop this slave trade? They're being humiliated. People are humiliated. What else?
They're abusing them.
People are abused, yeah. And continue.
They are getting entertained by the abuser.
People are humiliated and abused, and it's all for the entertainment while they're on the ship. I mean, if you're going to make them slaves, at least let them live dignified lives, right? Nope, we're going to humiliate them and abuse them for our entertainment. Hooray. What about this one? What could you use from here? Oh, wait.
The slaves are squished together and they don't have space to move.
Yeah, slaves are squished. No one has space to move. Kata?
How big they made the ship and how little space they gave.
Yeah, how big of a space they have and how little of space they give each person just so they can pack more in there. What else?
That they're violating their hygiene.
Yes, they have.
Space.
Yeah, they don't have there's no appropriate hygiene on here. People are forced to be this close. You cannot go to the bathrooms. What else?
They're not being considerate for this, the people's needs.
Yeah, their hygiene needs, their physical needs, okay? What else about, if you look on some of these, where this is an excerpt from this slave person who was kept as a slave. This is from their journal. You can look at some of the information in here about what people did when they were buying them. I'm not going to read all this right now, but because you guys have your own quotes that you can pull out of there. What else are some information pieces that you could give where you say, these are some of the things that happened during slavery?
They're basically putting for sale in a stand. So everyone can see.
Yeah, so during this buying and selling, look what's happening here. People are treated the way we would auction off cattle or auction off other farm animals. So there's a lot of things that you could say. We have this one. So you have the text with quotes. You have pictures where you can describe. More text with quotes. More text with quotes. You have a lot of information that you can put as your reasons. You guys have already done this research. When we start this letter, we have to do a proper introduction so people know what we are arguing. So you should have your split screen with your introductions and argument writing. And your letter to Parliament. So mine may look a little bit different than yours, and that's okay. Let me open it, guys. Edu, could you shut that door for us right now? Thanks. So if you're looking at this, it says letter to Parliament, and it says in our introduction paragraph there are 3 parts. What are the 3 parts of our introduction paragraph? Look on there and see if you can give me one. A lead. What's the second part? Can you see it? A claim or a thesis. It's down here. It's actually our 3rd. A claim, otherwise called a thesis in this case. And what's the middle part? Okay, we haven't talked much about background information. But there are 3 parts to your introduction paragraph. They all go together into one paragraph. But to make sure that you have all 3 in there, we're going to go through each of them separately. So, dear Who are we writing to?
Members of Parliament.
Dear Parliament, but you're probably going to be more formal and say members of Parliament. So everybody could write that in there now. Dear members of Parliament. I have to remember that when I spell Parliament, I say it in my head like Parliament. Do you guys do that with the word Wednesday? I have to say Wednesday in my head so I spell it correctly.
Yeah.
I have to say Parliament in my head so I spell it correctly. So it's not on here, it's the one it's right there. And the other one is called introductions. You're absent, you probably didn't do it. You're gonna have to download introductions. For introductions. All right, so members of Parliament, and it says insert your lead. Now, depending on the document, yours might look a little bit different than mine. We studied some different kinds of leads last week when we wrote our practice paragraphs. I gave you 3 yellow pieces that had sentence starters for your leads. We practiced these in class. It looks like this document. So if you remember this from the other day, I'm going to make it big. If you remember this from the other day, we had question, bold or startling statement, and definition was one we didn't cover, but it also has sentence starters on there. There are a total of 5 different lead strategies. I have given you sentence starters for 3 of them. We practiced 2 of them last week. It doesn't matter to me if you want to use one of the kinds that we already practiced, if you want to use one that has a sentence starter that we didn't practice, or one that doesn't have a sentence starter. You may use any 5 of these, but you need to create a lead like we practiced last week. I'm going to go over quickly what this definition one is. This example says, explode, to blow up into pieces, demolish by explosion of particles. This is how Merriam-Webster defines explode. Who's Merriam-Webster? The dictionary. Typically, people think of this word by mere definition as something destructive. However, it can also be used to describe how quickly someone comes into power or presence, which is exactly what Mark Forden did. He exploded onto the music scene like no one since Elvis Presley. So you might not define explode. You might define something negative. What if you defined the word cruelty and made the people of Parliament think about the word cruelty? What if you defined the word pain and made them think about that? What if you defined the word inhumane and made them think about that? What if you defined something negative and made the people of Parliament go, yeah, so what? And you told them the definition and said, and that is exactly what we are doing to human beings. That's a possible way to do it. Define something that's negative and make them think about it so they're like, oh, yeah. So that's one way you could use this starter. You can use the startling statement starters we practiced last week, or the question starter we practiced last week. You may want to try the quotation or real life example. Those are a little bit more difficult, but they are options. What year is it supposed to be?
1806.
1806. So you cannot use facts and you cannot use examples that quote something from 1860 or 1870, right? Go back. Go back. Okay? So right now I'm going to ask you to try to make a lead. Try to make a lead. If you go down on this document, it says practice writing 3 different leads that could start your essay. I'm going to ask you to practice 2. Any 2. You do not have to do the 3rd one. So you're going to practice any 2 different leads. Once you get it, you're going to get checked by me, and then we're going to decide which one is your best one. what do you think you will do with your best one? Put it where? Put it in the letter. But you need to practice too and get checked first. Hands up when you are ready for me to check you. Okay, if you're listening, clap once. If you're listening, clap twice. If you're listening, clap 3 times. All right. If you're listening, face the front. If you're listening, face the front. All the way. Okay. So I want to talk to you guys now about the next part. So if we're looking at our outline, the next part is, let me open it. Background information. So this next part is background information, and what you need to be doing with that is, you need to just be telling, oh goodness, you need to just be telling the people who are members of parliament what they already know probably. Reminding them of this situation that is African slave trade, buying, selling, trafficking. Because, remember, Parliament deals with all kinds of things. They deal with laws about cars, and laws about houses, and ownership, and marriage, and government, all kinds of different things. This is just one of the things that they deal with. So you're going to remind them of the background about African slave trade trafficking. As you see here, I have some sentence starters that help you start off a couple of sentences. In this, you probably only need 2 to 4 sentences max. You might say, members of parliament, may I remind you that, and then you're going to tell them something very basic about the background of this African slave trade. You're not going to put quotes and facts in here right now. That's coming tomorrow on our body paragraphs. This background information tells people, certainly you must remember that, some of these 5 W's. So when we say these 5 W's, you probably have heard of these before. Who, what, where, when, why, and then how. So my question to you right now is, what are some who, what, where, when, why, hows of this African slave trafficking? If I ask who, what are some who questions? What are some who questions about this whole thing? Who is involved? And what is the answer to that? Slaves from Africa and?
Europeans.
Europeans, including English people that you are being.
Who is affected?
Who is affected?
Who is to blame?
To blame. Who's to blame for this? Let's pause. What about some what questions?
What is causing the...
Okay. What is happening? And maybe where?
What is being traded?
What is being what?
Traded.
What is being traded? What is being traded on the American end over here?
Raw goods.
Okay, and what is being traded down here?
Manufacturing.
For what?
For
Uh-huh. Yes.
Is the student young?
Yomun? Yomu? Yep.
Can you come over here first?
What about some where questions? What are some where questions?
Where is it happening?
Where is this happening? So what are some of the answers for that?
England.
Happens in Africa, happens in England, happens in
America.
happens in the Atlantic Ocean. You might say from here to here to here. Those are all wheres. What about when? What are some whens?
When did it start?
Yeah, when did this happen or start? When did this start? And some of you guys might remember that the law in the last class we were in, the law took place in
1750.
1750, which means if they made a law in 1750, was this happening before then? Yeah, it was happening enough that they made a law about it. So it's been happening for at least this many years, back to this many years, and long before. So when do we do something about this? When did this start? What are some why questions?
Why did it happen?
Why do we do this? Why do we do this?
Because it's good for the economy.
Ah, we're putting economy over human lives. Okay?
Why it's causing problems?
Why is this a problem? You're going to have to let them know because probably they're going to tell you it's not a problem. I'm getting what I want. You're going to have to make a good enough case of why this is a problem at all. What about a how?
People are
How do we stop it?
How do we stop this? What else?
how people are treated.
How are people treated? So you have a bunch of these who, what, where, when, why, hows. You don't need to answer all of them. You need to only make 2 to 4 sentences of basic background information about the African slave trade trafficking situation. And you will use these sentence starters to help you create develop sentences. I'm going to wait until we're all facing the front. To help you create developed sentences. So you might use a couple of these. As you are aware, one of these. As you might remember, one of these. Certainly you must know that one of these. The answer to one of these. Okay? Certainly you must know this has been happening since. You might remember that this is happening, or this is what is being traded, that raw materials are being traded. Of course you know that we are involved along with Americans. You have to think about the answer to these and put that here. Very basic, no facts with quotes, no strong evidence. We're coming up on that soon, but not today. Before you leave, you should finish background information, and then we'll talk about putting this together more. You need to get it checked by me or by Ms. Cornell. I will come around. Any other questions? Are they individual or are they for class? Individual? No, because there's too much going on today. Another time, maybe tomorrow. No. People got too crazy.